Dr. Michael Byrne, I want to welcome you and thank you so much for joining me today. You're an expert in AI in gastroenterology. You're a CEO, founder of Satisfai Health, company that's in the artificial intelligence in gastroenterology space. Also founder of AI for GI and an interventional endoscopist. And I'm sure I'm missing a few hats that you wear. So it'll be great if we start with you telling us about all the different roles that you play as far as AI and gastroenterology is concerned.
Yeah, thank you, Praveen. I appreciate this invitation and this opportunity to talk to you about AI and endoscopy. So as you said, we all wear many hats. So my hats include being the CEO and founder of Satisfai Health. I also founded a joint venture, which we've named AI for GI, that I think is reasonably well known in the GI world of endoscopy. Our vision at Satisfai Health is to become the leading group in AI solutions for detection, for diagnosis and treatment of GI disease, particularly in endoscopy. And that's really where we're putting most of our attention. So I'm involved in AI at an academic level. As you, I think, know, I write a lot of leading articles in the GI journals and present at the symposia, DDW, UEGW, all the main GI conferences. Also, obviously, our group and I were working at a research and development level for providing solutions in the AI space, and also at a commercial level where we're trying to forge increasing relations with industry. So I guess that's a reasonable summary of where we're at right now.
I came across a recent editorial that you had written talking about whether AI and GI, particularly in optical biopsy, is a hype or reality. You ended that piece by saying that endoscopists who use AI will replace those who don't. So I wanted to, take you up on that and ask you to explain what you meant there.
Yes, I think, you have to be careful with statements that you make, that you don't make too many enemies in this space, talking about replacing endoscopists. But, tongue in cheek, I think there's a lot in that statement. I do believe that people have to embrace new technology. There are several layers to this answer. There's a competitive spirit amongst professionals. So we all want to use, hopefully, the latest and greatest technology. There's curiosity from the public who know all about AI now and the benefits and maybe the pitfalls of what AI can bring. And I think going forward, we'll probably have mandated performance metrics from the various payers and the regulatory bodies to look at how we are performing on a day-to-day basis. If you use CAD-E or computer-aided detection as an example, there are several studies that show, for example, that this AI-type tool improves the ADR or the adenoma detection rate. So in other words, looking for these precancerous polyps. And several groups in the US, a few years ago, I think it was, were advertising in a competitive fashion. They were advertising that their group was using the Fuse scope. If you may remember in your previous coverage, the Fuse scope was a scope which had some side lenses as well as a forward lens. And the idea was that it increased the field of vision of the scope so that you could see more. And there were some studies that showed that compared to a regular conventional forward viewing scope from the competitors, that you increase the ADR or the adenoma detection rate. So there were groups in the US who were advertising to the public. Our group uses the Fuse scope. This has been shown in studies to improve the pickup rate of polyps. You should come and have your procedure with us. In other words, it brought on a competition, right, between groups. So I think the same will happen with AI. Public who are availing of these services, particularly in healthcare systems like the US, will look and see, okay, is that group using the latest technology? I've heard that AI can help improve on the human miss rate. As I hope and as I expect in the next few years, it is mandated that we reach a certain minimum threshold for performance. So again, if I use the obvious one of colon polyps, that's one that most people can relate to. If we are mandated to reach, let's say, an ADR of 40%, I'm going to pick a figure. If you are not reaching that level, by whatever means, you should not be, maybe you won't be reimbursed, and or maybe your privileges for that procedure will not be renewed by your healthcare institution. And that is maybe the way to drive an increasingly better performance. To the naysayers, I would say, remember for example, EUS or endoscopic ultrasound. When that first came out properly 15, 20 years ago, a lot of people said, oh, it's black and white. It's going to be niche groups. You know, it's very hard to interpret. We're not radiologists and it won't take off. Now you can see it's in every major healthcare institution and it's driving a lot of interventional endoscopy. Remember the same with MBI or the narrowband imaging, the blue light on the Olymposcope initially, and all the other companies, Fuji and Pentax, have developed a version of virtual chromo endoscopy since. Initially, MBI was felt to almost be, how can I put it politely, a gimmick or something that most people wouldn't use because they didn't know how to interpret what they're looking at. That's not the case now. It's driving this visualization of pathology. So back to your question, you know, will people who don't use AI, will they get replaced by those who do? Maybe not replaced, but I think people realize very quickly that they have to adopt, you know, get on the train, it's moving, right? It's leaving the station.
Would DNA testing replace, or liquid biopsy replace even endoscopists who use AI for detection, for screening? You know,
Well,
which they could be to begin with, you know, but because if a liquid sample, a blood sample is going to tell you whether the patient has cancer, does not have cancer, and it's not doing just for GI related cancers, but it does, we get to the point where it does for 15 different types of cancers, then would they even do an endoscopy on such a patient? And where would that leave some of the AI initiatives which are underway right now?
no, I think that's a very good point. I think the scenario that you mentioned there, the liquid biopsy, the blood test, whatever, being very accurate and predictive of certain types of cancers is quite a way away. I mean, I know we're getting lots of biomarkers now for cancer, but I think expecting that next year we're going to have, for example, a blood test that is very accurate for determining your colon cancer risk is aspirational at this point. That doesn't mean that we're not going to have better and better non-invasive ways to look, whether it's with imaging, capsule endoscopy, blood tests, other, you know, genetic type tests looking for your own risk of colon cancer, for example. That's not going to come. I'm sure it is. And maybe that will also help to streamline endoscopy. So endoscopy becomes more therapeutic almost. You've assessed that somebody has a higher risk. You've assessed that somebody has, maybe on non-invasive imaging, they have polyps again, for example, on a capsule. And then you chase it with your endoscopic procedure to remove those polyps. So yes, it may take away some of the excessive volume of screening in endoscopy. It may promote even more appropriate intervention and therapeutic endoscopy or colonoscopy. Where will AI play a role there? We still need to see these things when we're looking for them. So the human still needs help. And a field that we haven't yet touched on in this talk so far is the field of optical biopsy, or doing a virtual or real-time pathology evaluation with your eyes or with the AI. That will need to be aided by technology. Once we find the lesion, we need to know what it is that we're looking at. So, yeah, very good points. But, you know, none of these things should be threats. These can all be, you know, cooperative interventions, right?
Okay. Now, last year when we spoke for my book, Scope Forward, I had asked you how many AI initiatives are underway in GI, and you had mentioned that at least 100. So I want to ask you, how accurate have you been on that prediction?
Well, if I look at the publishing, you know, those who are publishing or trying to publish in the main GI journals, then the number must be way more than 100, if that's how we define a group. In the last month alone, I think I've reviewed maybe 10 articles to do with AI in endoscopy for the main GI journals. And I'm just one reviewer. So if I'm reviewing 10 papers in this last month on AI alone, you can imagine, and they're all from different groups, you can imagine the number of groups globally who are actively working in this space. So I would say probably several hundred groups looking at this from an R&D or at least an academic perspective. How many of those are true companies or groups with all the facets? That's a little hard to define.
Okay. Now, I saw the announcement from Medtronic related to GI Genius, and they launched in Europe. They were supposed to launch in US this year. I'm curious to know, if there are other companies that are ready for prime time. Have things been launched already? Can practices, private practices particularly, take advantage of any of the AI solutions which are available out there?
So you correctly mentioned about some approvals for AI in endoscopy in Europe. With the FDA, it's still a little slow, but we're getting there for sure. There was the first, I think it was called the first global proceedings for AI meeting was in Washington, D.C. in September last year, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And there were representatives from the FDA, from the NIH, and global thought leaders in this space were there. A lot of the big tech companies, Amazon, Google, Microsoft people were at this meeting. So it certainly got some attention. And I think with the FDA, things are going to move quite quickly going forward. But as you said, there are some groups who've got their CE mark in Europe for detection. So for CAD-E, for computer-aided detection, again, in colon polyps, that's a disease where lots of effort has been made so far. So they include Medtronic with GI Genius. Fuji recently announced that their CAD-I or Riley system has also got CE approval for colon polyp detection, or CAD-E, as have Pentax with their Discovery system. I know that Olympus are working incredibly hard in this space too, and with optical biopsy, or rather CAD-X. But for confidentiality reasons, with my own involvement, as I mentioned maybe at the beginning, AI for GI has a co-development agreement with Olympus in polyps, so in AI. So I do know Olympus's plans to a large degree, but I can't really say much more right now. But it's definitely moving very quickly. For CAD-X, or computer-aided differentiation, in other words, doing a virtual biopsy, a virtual pathology, there is no FDA approval yet, to my knowledge, other than there's a group by the name of 9 Point Medical. I'm sure you know them. They are doing some great work with VLE, or volumetric laser endomicroscopy, mainly in the esophagus, for example. And they have an FDA approval for using an AI tool for image feature segmentation, but it's not true, how can I put it, optical biopsy. So more advanced CAD-X or optical biopsy is still awaited in relation to FDA approval, actually even for CE as well. There's a group in Japan, EndoBRAIN, who have done a lot of work in the last number of years on CAD-X or optical biopsy. And they did receive an approval from the Japanese version of the FDA, the PMDA, about 18 months ago for AI support for optical diagnosis of colon polyps. So hopefully that also sets the scene for other jurisdictions. I think it's important, Praveen, to point out that many of these tools, CAD-E, CAD-X, detection, differentiation, at the beginning, appropriately, they should be and will be clinical decision support tools to help the physician rather than standalone diagnostics, because right now we're not in a space where we can say for certain that that's what AI can do. It needs to be an aid to the physician right now, but things will change, I think, quite quickly.
So just to clarify, can a private practice gastroenterologist in the US play with some of these tools as of today, or no?
Not right now, because there is no tool, there's no AI tool in the endoscopy space other than the one that I mentioned with 9 Point Medical for this very sophisticated technology, this VLE device, where the AI allows for looking for certain features. Other than that, for colon polyp detection or colon polyp differentiation, there is no FDA approved device as it stands.
How far are we, before the day where they can start using it, or at least testing things out?
So, I don't have an inside track as to the FDA processes and what other groups are doing in terms of their regulatory pathways. But I think, given what's happened in Europe, and looking at the huge amount of work that is being published in the journals and the clinical trials that are listed on the clinicaltrials.gov website, for example, I think it's only a matter of time, short time, that the FDA will approve some of these AI devices. So my best guess is that detection, AI-guided detection for polyps, for example, will probably be in the market for physicians to use sometime next year.
Okay. Now, we're in the middle of a pandemic that's not over yet. And what I've noticed since the beginning of COVID is that a lot of trends that were already underway accelerated. And these could be business trends or technology trends, be it the number of AI initiatives. So I want to ask you, what kind of a GI world do you see post-COVID?
Well, the very obvious one is what you and I are doing today. We're having a Zoom meeting. And I think, with respect, many of my colleagues in my group here in Vancouver probably didn't even know what Zoom was 3 months ago. So, many physicians are not particularly tech savvy, but it's very incredible to see how quickly endoscopy for large meetings have gone virtual. So people are getting more and more familiar with the technology. As you say, COVID has obviously had a lot of significant downsides and a lot of heartache and disease burden, which is very sad, and hopefully we're coming out of it now. But lots of groups have focused, as you say, in GI on the COVID effects from a clinical standpoint. So to name a few, how COVID impacts patients with inflammatory bowel disease. Should we stop or start new biologics? The PPE use in endoscopy, it became fairly quickly clear that endoscopy was a risk procedure for transmission of COVID because of aerosolization, for example. How do we triage patients after lockdown starts to finish? So all of this came out of this recent pandemic. Can AI help in these COVID-related situations? I'm sure the answer is yes. We have everywhere. We have huge backlogs now for colon cancer screening. There are several papers coming out now showing that the burden of disease in the last 3 months is really quite alarming. We have to know how best to come out of that. How do we triage these patients? Who gets done first based on urgency and disease likelihood? I'm certain that AI can help decipher some of that for us. It can see patterns that is hard to see from a traditional regression type model. Live endoscopy courses, which used to be, of course, mostly people at that facility, but transmitted globally. That's all virtual now and is going very well. So I think this is just going to increase the appetite. We need help with improving clinical trial recruitment overall in IBD, in other disease states. We need to maybe rely less on the human interaction all the time. So we talked in the last few minutes about CADX or optical biopsy. If in time AI can truly do a standalone diagnostic in an optical biopsy, maybe we can take away the need for expert pathologists to do some of that very high volume but low hanging fruit work, and leave them to do the more difficult work and the more important work for cancer diagnosis. This is your expertise more than mine in the venture capital and the private equity world. Of course, there's been a huge economic downturn in the last few months and likely for the foreseeable future. And my impression, I'm not sure of yours, is that there is an appetite from such VC and PE groups to look for safe havens or growth havens for their investment. And healthcare has often been a safe haven, even in crises. And I think now groups are seeing that healthcare technology, including AI, is a safe haven and actually almost certainly a growth haven. So I think all of these factors will just help promote a quicker adoption of AI into our practice, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. My final question, Dr. Byrne, to you is, so for practices that understand, these shifts, they're seeing, they see that AI is coming, they see these technology shifts coming, but then they are currently tied to an older business model, where they're doing a lot of endoscopy procedures, seeing patients in the office, but they also see a shift saying that all this is going digital. Now, based on everything that what advice do you have for them on how do you pivot and take advantage of what's happening?
So that's again a very insightful question. It is tough. There are certainly, how can I put it? There are naysayers out there, or there are people who are slower adopters and seem to some degree to feel threatened, or rather that they don't need to pivot their practice quickly to involve technology such as AI. And we do need to get physician acceptance, physician familiarity with AI, so that we can feel comfortable and pass on that message to our patients, right? So do people need to pivot straight away? Probably not. I mean, it will take leaders in the field to have clinical experience in the next year or 2 or 3 with all of these tools that will be coming to our hands quite quickly. Beyond that, do people need to prepare right now? I've said I used a phrase in one of my editorials that there's a tidal wave of AI coming and we should prepare for that now. I do believe that's the case. AI is pervasive, right? It's in all aspects of our life, right? Every time you pick up your phone, or you use Siri or Alexa, every time you search for a flight, it's all AI guided, of course, as you well know. AI and genomics, what used to take the human months or longer to find, an AI model can decipher in minutes or hours. If you read any GI journal in the last 18 months, any medical journal in the last 18 months, I will challenge you to find an issue without an article on AI. So it all shows that this is all coming very quickly. Look at the focus of pharma, and in particular of the device medical industry. They are all focusing on better optics, better visualization, new light technology, better resolution, knowing full well that the human eye cannot appreciate all of that new data being thrown at them. And so that you will need some sort of intelligence built in to their endoscopes, for example. So the OEMs, the device manufacturers, know this is coming, and they're investing heavily in this space. So if you are looking from the outside in and you feel threatened, or you feel like you don't need to bring AI into your practice, maybe that's okay for now, but in the not too distant future, the next year or 2 or 3, it'll be there whether you like it or not.
I wanted to ask you, was there anything else that you wanted to share?
No, I think you've touched on all the main points. Of course, it's beyond just endoscopy. AI in our GI space, for my GI colleagues listening, or other medical colleagues, there are lots of predictive algorithms for rebleeding risk in patients with peptic ulcer disease, for who will respond to certain biologics in IBD, in liver disease, without using invasive technology, looking at biodata and patient metadata, clinical data, predicting with great accuracy how likely somebody with viral hepatitis is to get cirrhosis in 12 months' time. Lots of AI models are showing huge potential in these spaces. And, we could spend the next half an hour, Praveen, if we had that time today, talking about the various omics, the genomics, the transcriptomics, the proteomics, the metabolomics, and the microbiome, and the effect of that on GI disease, and how AI can help us decipher all those interlacing signals. But again, that would be a very separate and long conversation.
Yeah, that would make a good part 2, of this interview. But thank you so much for taking the time today.
Praveen, I would just like to say that I've been following many of your publications and your writings in the last couple of years, your blogs, which have been really helpful to show the business side of GI, but also where technology is going. Scope Forward, which I know is coming up for you sometime this summer in 2020, seems to encompass a lot of the things that we as GI physicians need to know. What is the business angle in GI? How does the current crisis that we've just come through affect our practice? Where's technology going? All of these things are very important to know, and I think you're doing a great job to encompass it in one space for busy physicians like me to digest it quickly.
Thank you so much, Dr. Byrne. Thank you for saying so and taking out the time today. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Praveen.